There are rules in the galaxy, unwritten ones. The kind nobody teaches you, but every species knows in their bones. You can burn a human city. You can steal their land. You can insult their flag, spit on their culture, and mock their short little lives. They will be angry. They will fight back, but they will still talk. They will still negotiate. They will still sit at your table and share a drink before they punch you in the mouth. But there is one rule, one single rule that no species should ever break. You never, ever touch a human child. Because when you do, the humans don't come to fight. They come to erase you. They don't want your surrender. They don't want your apology. They want your name removed from the stars. And the Valeth Empire, in all its ancient glory and arrogance, broke that rule. What followed was not a war. Wars have two sides. What followed was a reckoning. It was not perfect peace. There were border arguments and trade disagreements and the occasional skirmish between smaller civilizations. But the great empires, the ones that controlled entire star systems and commanded fleets that could blot out the sun, those empires had agreed to stop killing each other. The Galactic Concord had been signed by over 300 species, and for the most part, it held. Humans had joined the Concord late. They were a young species by galactic standards. Most civilizations had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humanity even discovered fire. But what humans lacked in time, they made up for in speed. Within 200 years of their first spaceflight, they had colonized 19 planets, built a fleet that rivaled the oldest empires, and earned a reputation that made every other species pay attention. Humans were not the strongest. The Drokar had thicker skin and could survive in temperatures that would melt a human alive. Humans were not the fastest. The Lyrathi could move so quickly that the eye could not follow them. Humans were not the smartest. The Alori had been solving equations that humanity had not even discovered yet. But humans were something else entirely. They were adaptable. They were stubborn. And most importantly, they were emotional in a way that no other species could fully understand. This was important, because in a galaxy full of logic and calculation, humans made decisions based on something deeper, something raw, something primal. Other species planned their wars over decades. Humans could go from laughter to violence in the time it took to blink. And when they were motivated by something personal, something close to the heart, they became something terrifying. They became unstoppable. Commander Alix Vor of the Valeth Empire did not understand this. He had studied humans the way a scientist studies a small insect under glass. He knew their biology, he knew their military tactics, he knew their political structure, but he did not understand what made them dangerous. He thought it was their weapons, or their ships, or their numbers. He was wrong. What made humans dangerous was their love. The Valeth Empire was old. It had existed for over 12,000 years. It controlled 47 star systems and ruled over 6 conquered species. The Valeth were tall and slender, with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that could see in nearly every spectrum of light. They believed themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution. Every other species was beneath them, not enemies, not even rivals. Simply lesser beings who had not yet accepted Valeth's superiority. For most of their history, this arrogance had served them well. The species they conquered were small and weak, and the Valeth absorbed them into the empire with minimal resistance. But the galaxy was changing. New powers were rising. And the humans, with their loud voices and their stubborn refusal to bow to anyone, were becoming a problem. The trouble began on a small planet called Valhari Prime. It was a border world, sitting right on the edge of Valeth space and the human colonial zone. The planet itself was nothing special. It was a rocky world with thin forests and shallow oceans, barely suitable for colonization. But it had something valuable beneath its surface. Cesium, a rare mineral used in faster-than-light engine cores. Both species wanted it. Under the Galactic Concord, the planet should have been designated as a shared resource zone. Negotiations should have been conducted. Diplomats should have been sent. Agreements should have been reached. But Commander Alix Vor did not believe in sharing. He believed the Valeth had a divine right to every resource in the galaxy, and so he made a decision that would change everything. He sent a military garrison to Valhari Prime without informing the Concord. 3,000 Valeth soldiers, armed with pulse rifles and plasma cannons, landed on the northern continent and began setting up mining operations. They raised the Valeth flag and declared the planet sovereign Valeth territory. The humans had already been there. Not soldiers, not marines, not warriors. Civilians. A small colony of about 800 people had been living on Valhari Prime for nearly 3 years. They were miners and farmers and scientists. Families, children. People who had come to the edge of known space looking for a quiet life and a chance to build something new. When the Valeth garrison arrived, the colony leader, a woman named Sarah Chen, sent a message to the garrison commander requesting a meeting. She was polite. She was calm. She explained that the colony had been established under human colonial law and registered with the Galactic Concord. She asked for a peaceful discussion about sharing the planet's resources. Commander Alex Vore did not respond to her message. Instead, he sent a detachment of 200 soldiers to the colony with a simple order: remove the humans, by any means necessary. The soldiers arrived at the colony at dawn. Sarah Chen met them at the gates with her hands raised and her voice steady. She asked them to wait. She asked them to talk. She told them there was enough room on the planet for everyone. The Valeth squad leader, a young officer named Phallus, looked at her with his 4 cold eyes and told her she had 1 hour to evacuate. 1 hour. 800 people. Families with children and elderly and sick. 1 hour to pack up their entire lives and walk into the wilderness with nothing. Sarah Chen refused. Not with anger, not with threats. She simply said, no. She said her people had a right to be there. She said she would not move her community into danger. She said she would contact Earth and the Concord and that this would be resolved through proper channels. She asked again for patience. Talus did not have patience. He had orders. What happened next was recorded by the colony's security cameras. Every second of it. Every terrible, unforgivable second. The Valeth soldiers moved into the colony. They did not fire warning shots. They did not use non-lethal force. They came in with pulse rifles set to kill, and they began clearing buildings. The colonists, unarmed civilians, ran. They screamed, and they ran, and they tried to hide their children. 37 colonists were killed in the first 10 minutes. Men and women who had done nothing wrong. Farmers and teachers and engineers who had never held a weapon in their lives. They were cut down in the streets of their own colony like animals. And then something happened that would echo across the entire galaxy, something that would wake a sleeping giant and bring the wrath of an entire species down upon the Valeth Empire. A 6-year-old girl named Lily Chen, the daughter of Sarah Chen, ran out of her family's home looking for her mother. She was small and scared and crying. She wore a yellow dress with white flowers on it. She had a stuffed bear clutched in one hand and tears streaming down her face. She ran into the street calling for her mama. A Valeth soldier saw her, a trained warrior who had served the Empire for 15 years. A soldier who should have known better. A soldier who should have seen a frightened child and felt something. Anything resembling mercy. He raised his rifle and fired. Lily Chen was killed instantly. Her small body crumpled in the street, the stuffed bear falling from her hand and rolling into the dust. She was 6 years old. She had been alive for barely 2,000 days. She had never hurt anyone. She had never even raised her voice in anger, and she was gone. The colony's security footage captured everything. The image of Lily Chen lying in the street in her yellow dress became the most viewed image in human history within 24 hours. It was broadcast on every human news network, shared on every communication platform, displayed on every screen on every human world, and something changed. Something fundamental and ancient and terrible shifted inside the collective soul of humanity. It was not anger. Anger was too small a word. It was not rage. Rage burns hot and fades. This was something else. This was cold. This was quiet. This was the sound of 8 billion hearts on Earth and 12 billion more across human space, all beating with the same terrible purpose at the same terrible time. Sarah Chen survived the attack. She survived because 3 colonists shielded her body with their own. She was pulled from the rubble with broken ribs and a shattered arm. And the first thing she said when she could speak was her daughter's name. When they told her, when they showed her the footage, she did not scream. She did not cry. She went silent. And her silence was louder than any scream the galaxy had ever heard. The footage reached Earth in 6 hours. It reached the United Human Federation Senate in 7. By the 8th hour, Every human ambassador in the galaxy had been recalled. By the 10th hour, the human fleet, all of it, every single ship from every colony and outpost and station, had been mobilized. Admiral James Corwin was the commander of the United Human Federation Navy. He was 62 years old, with grey hair and steady hands, and eyes that had seen more battles than most people could imagine. He had fought in the Proxima Rebellion. He had commanded the defense of New Haven. He had negotiated ceasefires and signed peace treaties and shaken hands with enemies. He was a man of discipline and reason and calm. When he saw the footage of Lily Chen, he sat alone in his office for 11 minutes. His staff reported later that they heard nothing from inside the room. No sound at all. When he emerged, his eyes were red and his jaw was set like iron, and he gave an order that had not been given in the entire history of the United Human Federation. Every ship, every soldier, every Marine, every pilot, every reserve unit, every retired veteran who could still hold a weapon, every factory that could produce ammunition, every shipyard that could build a warship, everything, all of it pointed in one direction. The Valeth Empire. The Galactic Concord called an emergency session. Representatives from 300 species gathered in the Great Chamber on Nexus Station, all of them talking at once, all of them trying to understand what was happening. The Allori ambassador, widely considered the wisest diplomat in the galaxy, approached the human delegation and asked them to reconsider. He spoke of peace and negotiation and the importance of measured response. The human ambassador, a woman named Dr. Priya Kapoor, looked at him with eyes that held no warmth and said 5 words that were recorded and repeated across every corner of known space. They killed a little girl. The Allori ambassador, a being of immense intelligence and thousands of years of diplomatic experience, looked into her eyes and saw something he had never seen before, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, even though he did not have hair or a neck in the human sense. He saw certainty. Absolute, unshakable, terrifying certainty. He understood then that no words would stop what was coming. He stepped back and said nothing more. The Valeth ambassador tried to speak. He stood at the podium and began to explain that the situation on Velahari Prime had been a misunderstanding, that the soldier who killed the child had acted without orders, that the Empire was willing to discuss reparations and compensation. He got 3 sentences into his speech before Dr. Kapoor interrupted him. "You do not get to say her name," she said. "You do not get to call her a misunderstanding. You do not get to put a price on a child's life. You killed Lily Chen. You killed her in a yellow dress while she looked for her mother. And now every single one of you is going to learn what that means." She walked out of the chamber. Every human in the station walked out with her, and the galaxy held its breath. In the Valeth capital, Emperor Malthus VII sat on his throne and listened to reports from his military advisors. They told him the humans were mobilizing. They told him the human fleet was assembling at Starbase Fortuna, just 3 jumps from Valeth space. They told him the humans had recalled every ship and activated every reserve. The Emperor was not afraid. He had ruled for 40 years. His empire had crushed every enemy it had ever faced. He had 6,000 warships and 2 million soldiers, and the resources of 47 star systems. He looked at the numbers and he saw a young, emotional species throwing a tantrum over a single dead child. He did not understand. He could not understand. Because the Valeth did not love the way humans loved. They did not feel the way humans felt. To the Valeth, a child was a future soldier or worker, a resource. Losing one was unfortunate but not significant. They could not comprehend that to humans, a child was everything. A child was the reason humans built cities and cured diseases and reached for the stars. A child was not a resource. A child was the whole point. And so the Emperor made his second mistake. His first had been allowing Commander Alex Vor to send soldiers to Velahari Prime. His second was far worse. He sent a message to the United Human Federation. It was brief and dismissive. It expressed mild regret for the incident on Velahari Prime, but stated firmly that the planet was Valeth territory and that the Empire would not withdraw its forces. It offered a small financial compensation for the dead colonists and suggested that the humans learn to respect Valeth's sovereignty. He might as well have poured fuel on a fire. Admiral Corwin received the message and read it once. He set it down on his desk and looked at the star chart on his wall. 47 Valeth systems, 6,000 warships, 2 million soldiers. He picked up his communicator and opened a channel to every ship in the fleet, every captain, every crew member, every Marine waiting in the launch bay, every pilot strapped into their fighter, hundreds of thousands of humans, all listening, all waiting, all carrying the image of a little girl in a yellow dress in their hearts. He said, "They are not sorry. Move out." And the fleet moved. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velhari system like a storm rolling over a quiet ocean. There was no warning broadcast, no diplomatic hail, no final offer of negotiation. There was only silence. And then there were ships. Thousands of them. Destroyers and cruisers and carriers and frigates and gunships, all arranged in a formation so tight and so precise that the Valeth sensor operators who first detected them thought their instruments were malfunctioning. No fleet moved like that. No fleet appeared with that kind of coordination. It was as if a single mind controlled every vessel, as if every captain and every pilot and every gunner breathed in the same rhythm. The Valeth garrison fleet at Velhari Prime consisted of 80 warships. They were well armed and crewed by experienced officers. Under normal circumstances, 80 Valeth warships were enough to hold any system against any reasonable threat. But this was not a reasonable threat. This was the entire striking arm of the United Human Federation Navy, and when the Valeth fleet commander saw the sensor readings, he did something that no Valeth officer had done in over 1,000 years. He hesitated. Admiral Corwin sat in the command chair of the UHF Retribution, the flagship of the human fleet. The bridge was quiet. Every officer at their station, every screen lit with data, every system primed and ready. Corwin looked at the tactical display and saw the 80 Valeth ships arranged in a defensive ring around the planet. He saw their weapons powering up. He saw their shields activating. And he felt nothing. No excitement, no fear, no hesitation. There was only the cold, steady purpose that had settled into his bones the moment he saw a little girl in a yellow dress lying dead in a dusty street. "All ships," he said. His voice was calm, almost quiet. "Weapons free." The battle for Velhari Prime lasted 14 minutes. Military historians across the galaxy would later study those 14 minutes in detail, breaking down every maneuver, every shot, every decision. They would write papers and give lectures and create simulations, and every single one of them would reach the same conclusion. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration. The human ships moved with a ferocity that defied tactical logic. They did not form defensive lines. They did not hold back reserves. They did not probe the enemy's defenses looking for weaknesses. They simply attacked. Every ship at full speed, every weapon firing, every pilot pushing their vessel to its absolute limit. The Valeth had never seen anything like it. Their tactical computers, designed to predict enemy behavior based on thousands of years of recorded warfare, could not process what was happening. The humans were not fighting the way any rational species fought. They were not trying to minimize their own losses. They were not trying to achieve a strategic objective. They were trying to destroy everything in front of them, and they did not care what it cost. The Valeth fleet commander ordered a retreat after 7 minutes. It was the right decision. It was the only decision. But it came too late for most of his ships. 53 Valeth warships were destroyed in those 14 minutes. 20 more were disabled and captured. 7 managed to jump to faster than light and escape. 7 out of 80. And the human fleet had lost only 12 ships. The numbers sent a shockwave through the Valeth military command. They were not just bad numbers. They were impossible numbers. The Valeth had better shields, better armor, better individual weapons. Ship for ship, they were supposed to be superior. But the humans had fought with a coordination and an intensity that erased every technical advantage the Valeth possessed. It was as if every human ship was fighting not just for victory, but for something personal, something that could not be measured in tactical data, because every single human in that fleet was fighting for Lily Chen. Every single one of them carried her image in their mind. Every single one of them had watched the footage and felt that cold, quiet thing settle into their chest. They were not soldiers following orders. They were a species answering a call that went deeper than rank or duty or strategy. They were parents and brothers and sisters and friends, and they had seen one of their children murdered, and nothing in the universe was going to stand between them and the ones who did it. When the last Valeth ship either burned or fled, Admiral Corwin turned his attention to the planet below. The Valeth ground forces were still there. 3,000 soldiers holding the human colony, holding the place where Lily Chen had died. The Marines went down in dropships, 8,000 of them, falling through the atmosphere like iron rain. The Valeth ground commander, General Rethis, watched them descend on his tactical display and ordered his troops to fortify their positions. He had heard about the fleet battle in orbit, and he knew the situation was bad. But he was a ground commander. He had fought insurgencies and sieges and jungle warfare. He believed that on the ground, where it was soldier against soldier, the Valeth still had the advantage. He was wrong in a way he could not have imagined. The human Marines landed in 3 waves. The first wave secured the perimeter around the colony. The second wave pushed inward. The third wave went directly for the colony itself. And as they fought, something became clear to every Valeth soldier on the ground. These humans were not fighting like humans normally fought. There was no banter on their communication channels, no battle cries, no shouting. The Marines moved in complete silence. They communicated through hand signals and helmet displays. They cleared buildings and secured intersections and flanked positions with a mechanical precision that was almost robotic. But it was not robotic. It was focused. It was controlled. It was the silence of people who were so angry, so deeply and thoroughly angry, that they had passed beyond the point where anger had a sound. General Rethis lost contact with his forward units within the first hour. He lost contact with his eastern flank within the second. By the third hour, his forces had been pushed back to a defensive perimeter around the main mining complex, and he was receiving reports that made his 4 eyes go wide with disbelief. His soldiers, trained warriors of the Valeth Empire, were surrendering, not because they were being overrun, not because they were out of ammunition. They were surrendering because they were afraid. Because the humans moved through the darkness like ghosts, appearing and disappearing, striking from angles that should have been impossible, and every time a Valeth soldier looked into the visor of a human Marine, they saw something in those eyes that made their weapons feel very small and very useless. General Rethis did not surrender. He gathered his remaining forces, about 600 soldiers, and prepared for a last stand at the mining complex. He told his troops that they were warriors of the Empire and that they would die with honor. The humans did not give them the chance. A single Marine walked out of the darkness toward the Valeth position. She was not carrying a weapon. She was carrying something small in her hands. She walked across the open ground between the 2 forces, completely exposed, completely vulnerable. The Valeth soldiers watched her come, their weapons trained on her, their fingers on their triggers. General Rethis ordered them to hold fire. He was curious. He wanted to understand. The Marine stopped about 30 meters from the Valeth line. She knelt down and placed the object she was carrying on the ground. Then she stood up and looked directly at General Rethis with eyes that held no fear and no mercy and no room for negotiation. "That is Lily Chen's bear," she said. Her voice carried clearly across the silent battlefield. "She was holding it when your soldier murdered her. She was 6 years old. She liked to draw pictures of stars. She wanted to be an astronaut when she grew up. She called this bear Captain Fuzzy." She paused. The silence was enormous. "You have one chance to put down your weapons and face justice for what happened here. If you do not, we will come for you. And we will not stop. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Not ever. You killed one of our children. There is no hole deep enough, no planet far enough, no fleet strong enough to protect you from what comes next. Put down your weapons. Now." General Rethis looked at the stuffed bear lying in the dirt. He looked at the Marine standing alone and unafraid. He looked at his soldiers and saw fear in their eyes. And for the first time in his long career, he understood something about humans that no intelligence report had ever captured. He understood that they were not bluffing. They never bluffed about their children. Never. He ordered his troops to lay down their weapons. 600 Valeth soldiers dropped their rifles and raised their hands, and the battle for Velhari Prime was over. The human Marines moved in and secured the prisoners in silence. No one celebrated. No one cheered. There was nothing to celebrate. This was not a victory. It was the beginning of something much larger. Back on Nexus Station, the Galactic Concord was in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species were demanding information, demanding explanations, demanding that someone, anyone, stop what was clearly about to become a full-scale war. The Alori delegation had proposed an emergency ceasefire. The Drokar had offered to mediate. The Lyrathi had suggested economic sanctions against both parties. Nobody was listening. The Valeth ambassador stood at the podium and denounced the human attack on Velhari Prime as an act of war. He demanded that the Concord condemn the United Human Federation and impose sanctions. He called the human response disproportionate and barbaric. He spoke for 20 minutes about Violeth sovereignty and galactic law and the principles of civilized behavior. When he finished, the chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then the Nexian ambassador, a small furry being from a species that had been conquered by the Valeth 300 years ago, stood up and spoke. "You killed the child," he said simply. "What did you think was going to happen?" The chamber erupted. Species that had been silent for centuries suddenly found their voices. The Nexians, the Varani, the Telesi, the Kreth. All of them conquered peoples living under Valeth rule, and all of them watching a species finally do what they had dreamed of doing for generations: stand up to the Empire, fight back. Not for territory or resources or political advantage, but for a single child. For the simple, fundamental principle that you do not kill children. You do not hurt the innocent. You do not use your power to destroy the helpless. The Valeth ambassador tried to regain control of the chamber, but it was too late. The political landscape of the galaxy was shifting beneath his feet like sand in a rising tide. Species that had been loyal allies of the Empire for centuries were suddenly reconsidering their allegiance. Species that had been neutral were now leaning toward the humans, and species that had been under Valeth occupation were beginning to whisper a word that had not been spoken in the halls of the Concord in a very long time: rebellion. On Earth, the public response was unlike anything that had come before it. This was not the usual pattern of outrage and protest that faded after a few days. This was sustained and growing and evolving into something organized and purposeful. Factories that produced consumer goods retooled overnight to produce military equipment. Universities opened their research labs to military engineers. Civilians lined up at recruitment centers in numbers that overwhelmed the processing systems. Retired veterans dusted off their uniforms and reported for duty. People who had never held a weapon in their lives volunteered for support roles, for logistics, for medical units, for anything that would help. And it was not just the military. Artists painted murals of Lily Chan on buildings across every human city. Musicians wrote songs that were played on every station. Writers published stories and poems and essays. A sculptor on Mars created a statue of a little girl in a yellow dress holding a stuffed bear. And within a week, replicas of that statue appeared on every human colony world. The image of Lily Chan became more than a photograph. It became a symbol, a rallying cry. A reminder of what was at stake and why every sacrifice was worth making. Admiral Corwin knew that Velhari Prime was only the beginning. The Valeth Empire had 47 systems and thousands of warships and millions of soldiers. Taking one planet was a statement. Defeating the Empire would require a campaign of a scale that humanity had never attempted before. It would take years. It would cost lives. It would push the species to its absolute limit. He also knew that none of that mattered, because when he looked at the men and women under his command, when he read the reports from Earth and the colonies and the stations, he saw something that could not be quantified by any tactical computer. He saw unity, complete, total, unwavering unity. Humanity was not divided on this. There were no debates, no dissenting voices, no political factions arguing about the right course of action. 8 billion people on Earth and 12 billion across human space all agreed on one simple thing. The Valeth Empire had killed a child, and the Valeth Empire was going to pay. The next phase of the campaign began 3 days after Velhari Prime. Admiral Corbin divided the fleet into 4 strike groups, each one targeting a different Valeth border system. The strategy was aggressive and risky. Splitting the fleet meant each group would be outnumbered by the local Valeth defenses. But Corwin understood something that the Valeth did not. He understood that his people would fight harder, move faster, and endure more than any force the Empire could field, not because they were better soldiers, but because they were fighting for something that mattered more than tactics or technology. The first strike group hit the Valeth system of Korath. It was a military staging ground with a large orbital station and a fleet of 200 warships. The human force of 93 ships engaged the Valeth fleet in a running battle that lasted 2 days. The humans took losses. They lost 27 ships and over 4,000 crew members. But they destroyed or captured every Valeth vessel in the system and took the orbital station intact. The second strike group hit Thesan, a Valeth industrial world responsible for producing 70% of the Empire's warship armor plating. The battle was fierce and costly, but the human marines secured the orbital factories and shut down production. The third group struck at Valun, a communications hub that connected the core Valeth systems to their outer territories. When it fell, the Empire's ability to coordinate its forces was crippled overnight. The fourth group, the smallest and most daring, slipped past the Valeth defenses entirely and hit the supply lines feeding the Empire's central fleet. Convoys carrying fuel and ammunition and food were intercepted and destroyed. Cargo ships were captured. Supply depots were raided. In 2 weeks, the Valeth Empire went from a position of supreme confidence to one of growing alarm. Their border systems were falling. Their supply lines were cut. Their communications were disrupted. And the humans kept coming. Wave after wave, system after system, battle after battle. They did not stop. They did not slow down. They did not negotiate. Emperor Malthius VII called an emergency meeting of his war council. His generals stood before him and presented their reports, and for the first time in his 40-year reign, the emperor saw fear in the eyes of his commanders. Not fear of the humans, fear of what the humans represented. Fear of a force that could not be negotiated with, could not be bought off, could not be intimidated, and could not be stopped. "They are not fighting for territory," one general said, his voice strained. "They are not fighting for resources or political power. They are fighting because we killed a child." Every soldier we face, every pilot, every marine, they all carry the image of that child. It drives them beyond reason, beyond self-preservation. We cannot defeat an enemy that does not care if it dies. The emperor slammed his fist on the table and demanded solutions. He demanded strategies and plans and weapons that could turn the tide. His generals looked at each other and said nothing, because they had no solutions. They had studied human warfare for decades, and nothing in their files had prepared them for this. Nothing had prepared them for a species that fought not with calculated precision, but with the raw, bottomless fury of a parent who has lost a child, because that was the truth the Valeth could not understand. Every human fighting this war was a parent. Maybe not literally, but in the way that mattered. Every human looked at Lily Chen and saw their own daughter, their own son, their own niece, their own nephew, their own student, their own neighbor's kid who played in the yard next door. Humans did not see children as resources or future workers or units of production. They saw children as the most precious thing in the universe. And when one was taken from them, something broke inside them. Something that could not be fixed with apologies or money or diplomatic words. Something that could only be answered with action. And the Empire kept burning. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the galaxy watched and understood something it had never fully grasped before. Humans were not dangerous because of their ships or their weapons or their numbers. Humans were dangerous because they loved. And there was nothing in the universe more terrifying than a species that loved this much, fighting for a child it could never bring back. The war had been going on for 3 months when the rebellion started. It did not begin with a grand announcement or a dramatic speech. It began with a whisper on the Valeth colony world of Nexia. A Nexian dock worker, a small furry being whose species had been conquered by the Empire 3 centuries ago, refused to load munitions onto a Valeth transport ship. When his supervisor demanded to know why, the dock worker looked up at him and said, "I am not helping you fight people who care more about a dead child than you care about any of us alive." Within a day, every Nexian worker on the planet had stopped working. Within a week, the Voranion Thesan, a species of quiet, gentle beings who had been forced into factory labor for generations, walked away from their machines. The Talesi, brilliant engineers who maintained the Empire's warship engines, laid down their tools. The Kreth, massive 4-armed beings who served as manual laborers in Valeth mines, folded all 4 of their arms and sat down in the tunnels and refused to move. The Valeth Empire had been built on the backs of conquered species. Its warships were maintained by Talesi engineers. Its ammunition was manufactured by Vorani workers. Its raw materials were mined by Kreth laborers. Its logistics were managed by Nexian administrators. Without these species, the Empire could not function. Without these species, the Empire could not fight. And they all stopped at the same time. Emperor Malthius sent enforcers. He sent soldiers to the factories and the mines and the docks with orders to force the workers back to their stations. In some places, violence was used. Valeth troops fired into crowds of unarmed workers. Bodies fell. Blood was spilled. But the workers did not go back. They looked at the soldiers pointing weapons at them, and they thought about a little human girl in a yellow dress, and they decided that if a species on the other side of the galaxy could go to war for one dead child, then they could find the courage to say no. The violence only made things worse. Images of Violith soldiers firing on unarmed workers spread across the galaxy just as the image of Lily Chen had spread among humans. And now the Galactic Concord, which had been trying to remain neutral, could no longer look away. 300 species had signed the Concord on the promise that galactic civilization would protect the weak from the powerful. The Valith were making a mockery of that promise in real time, and every species in the galaxy could see it. The Allori were the first to act. They had always been the galaxy's diplomats, the voices of reason and calm, but even the Allori had limits. The Allori High Council issued a formal statement condemning the Valith Empire for the massacre on Velhari Prime and the ongoing violence against its subject species. They withdrew their ambassador from the Valith capital and imposed a complete trade embargo. Coming from the Allori, the most respected civilization in the galaxy, this was not just a political statement, it was a judgment. And it carried weight that no fleet of warships could match. The Drokar followed. Then the Lyrathi. Then a dozen smaller species, then 24, then 50. Within a month, the Valith Empire was diplomatically isolated. No trade, no communication, no allies. Every species in the galaxy had turned its back on the Empire, and the reason was always the same. You killed a child. You killed unarmed workers. You do not deserve our support. Admiral Corwin watched the political situation develop and adjusted his strategy accordingly. The rebellion within the Empire meant that the Violith war machine was grinding to a halt. Their ships could not be repaired without Telesi engineers. Their weapons could not be manufactured without Varani factories. Their fleets could not be supplied without Nexian logistics. The Empire was eating itself from the inside. And all Corwin had to do was keep the pressure on. He pushed deeper into Violith space. System by system, planet by planet, the human fleet advanced. And at every conquered world, something happened that the galaxy did not expect. The humans did not loot. They did not pillage. They did not enslave. When they took a Valith colony, they secured the military installations and arrested the military commanders. And then they turned to the civilian population and said, "You are safe. No one is going to hurt you." On the Valith agricultural world of Pelos, a human marine captain named David Okafor was tasked with securing a small farming community. The Valith civilians there were terrified. They had been told by their government that the humans were savage beasts who would torture and kill anyone they captured. They hid in their homes and clutched their children and waited for the monsters to come. Captain Okafor walked into the village square, removed his helmet, and sat down on a bench. He took out a ration pack and began to eat his lunch. His marines spread out through the village, not kicking down doors or dragging people into the street, but knocking politely and offering medical supplies. When a Valith mother cautiously emerged from her home, holding her infant child, Captain Okafor looked at the baby and smiled and said, "Beautiful kid." This was the enemy. This was the monster her government had warned her about, and he was complimenting her child. "We did not come here to hurt families," Okafor told her. "We came here because your empire hurt ours. But you are not responsible for what your emperor did. Your children are not responsible. We do not make war on children. That is the difference between us and the ones who killed Lily Chen." The story of Captain Okafor and the Valith village spread through occupied territory like wildfire. Other stories followed. A human medic treating wounded Valith civilians. A human engineer repairing a damaged water purification system in a Valith town. A human pilot evacuating Valith children from a battle zone. Story after story after story, each one contradicting everything the Valith people had been told about humans. And slowly, the Valith people began to understand something. The humans had not come to destroy them. The humans had come to hold them accountable. There was a difference, and it was a difference that the Valith government could not comprehend, but that the Valith people, the ordinary farmers and shopkeepers and teachers who had never wanted any of this, understood perfectly. The war reached the inner systems of the Empire in the 5th month. The Valith home fleet, the largest concentration of warships in the Empire, assembled around the capital world of Valith Prime. 1,200 warships. The pride of an ancient civilization. Every ship crewed by veterans, every weapon charged, every shield at maximum. Admiral Corwin brought everything he had. 900 human warships, battered and scarred from months of constant combat, their hulls patched and their crews exhausted. On paper, the Valith had the advantage. More ships. Home territory. Prepared defenses. Every military analyst in the galaxy predicted a long, bloody siege that could last months. It lasted 3 days. Not because the humans had better weapons or superior tactics, though both played a role. It lasted 3 days because the Valith fleet was crumbling from within. Crews that had been fighting for months without proper supplies were exhausted and demoralized. Engineers who should have been Talesi were replaced by undertrained Valith technicians who could not keep the ships running at full capacity. Ammunition that should have been flowing from Varani factories was rationed and running low. The mighty Valith war machine, the pride of 12,000 years of empire, was fighting on fumes and fear, and the humans were fighting on something else entirely. On the second day of the battle, the Valith flagship, the Emperor's Pride, was surrounded by 6 human cruisers. Its shields were failing. Its weapons were damaged. Its crew was dying. The ship's captain, Admiral Valith Kor, the Emperor's own nephew, sent a surrender signal. It was the first time in recorded history that a Valith flagship had surrendered to anyone. When the human Marines boarded the ship, they found something in Admiral Kor's private quarters that would become one of the most talked about details of the entire war. Taped to the wall above his desk was a printed image of Lily Chen. Not the famous photograph of her body lying in the street, a different one. A photograph of her smiling. A photograph from her mother's personal files that had been released to the press months earlier. Lily Chen, age 6, grinning at the camera with a gap in her front teeth and her stuffed bear tucked under one arm. When asked why he had that image on his wall, Admiral Kor said something that the Marines reported to their superiors, who reported it to Admiral Corwin, who repeated it in his memoirs years later. I put it there to remind myself every day what we did, what we truly did. Not a strategic error. Not a political miscalculation. We murdered a child. I wanted to look at her face every morning and understand why we deserve everything that is happening to us. The battle for Valith Prime ended on the 3rd day when the remaining Valith fleet, less than 400 ships, broke formation and scattered. Some jumped to the outer systems. Some surrendered. Some simply powered down their engines and waited. The orbital defenses fell within hours, and the human fleet took position around the Valith homeworld. Admiral Corwin did not order a bombardment. He did not rain fire down on cities or reduce the capital to rubble. He could have. Every weapon in the fleet was capable of turning the planet's surface into glass. There were voices, even among his own officers, who argued for it, who said that the Valith had brought this upon themselves and deserved to feel the full weight of human wrath. Corwin refused. We are not them, he said on an open channel that was monitored by the entire galaxy. We did not cross the stars and sacrifice our sons and daughters to become the thing we are fighting against. We came here for justice. Justice is not destruction. Justice is accountability. Every being responsible for the massacre on Valhari Prime will answer for what they did. Every commander who gave the order, every officer who carried it out, every leader who allowed it to happen. They will face trial. They will face judgment. But we will not kill their children to punish their parents. We are human. And that means something. Emperor Malpheus VII was arrested in his throne room. He was sitting on his ancient throne, wearing his ceremonial robes, his 4 eyes staring at the doors as the human Marines entered. He did not resist. He did not speak. He looked at the soldiers who had come for him, and he saw in their faces not hatred or cruelty, but something he had never expected. He saw grief. These warriors who had fought across the galaxy, who had destroyed his fleet and broken his empire, they were grieving, still. After all these months, they were still grieving for a little girl they had never met. And in that moment, sitting on his throne as his empire crumbled around him, the Emperor finally understood what humans were. He understood why his generals had failed and his fleets had burned and his subjects had rebelled. He understood the one truth about humanity that no intelligence report had ever captured. Humans did not fight because they were strong. They fought because they cared. And caring, real caring, the kind that started in the gut and burned through the heart and would not stop, no matter how many years passed or how many light years stretched between you and the thing you cared about, that was the most powerful force in the universe. More powerful than any weapon, more powerful than any fleet, more powerful than any empire. The trials lasted 6 months. They were held on Nexus Station, in the Great Chamber of the Galactic Concord, witnessed by representatives of every species in known space. Commander HFY War, who had ordered the assault on the colony, was tried first. He was found guilty of crimes against sentient life and sentenced to permanent imprisonment on a penal world. He showed no remorse. The soldier who had killed Lily Chen, a Violeth named Corporal Draven Sith, was tried next. When he was brought into the chamber, the gallery fell silent. Every eye in the room was on him. He was young, barely out of training when the massacre happened. His defense argued that he had been following orders, that the chaos of the assault had clouded his judgment, that he had not intended to fire on a child. Sarah Chen was in the gallery. She had traveled across the galaxy to be there. She sat in the front row with her hands folded in her lap, and she watched the being who had killed her daughter. She did not shout. She did not cry. She simply watched. When it was her turn to speak, she stood before the chamber and held up a drawing. It was a picture Lily had made the week before she died, a crayon drawing of their family standing on Velhari Prime, with the 2 moons in the sky above them and little stick figure versions of Sarah and Lily holding hands. In the corner of the drawing, in the crooked handwriting of a 6-year-old, Lily had written, "Me and Mama on our new home," not a strategic asset, not a military target. A little girl who drew pictures of her mama and wanted to see the stars. I will never hear her laugh again. I will never hold her hand again. I will never watch her grow up and become the person she was meant to be. And no trial, no sentence, no punishment will ever make that right. But you will answer for what you did. Not because it will bring her back, but because she mattered. Because every child matters. Because the galaxy needs to know that there is a line, and when you cross it, there are consequences. Corporal Draven Sith was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. When the verdict was read, he lowered his head, and for the first and only time during the trial, he spoke. "I am sorry," he said. "I know it is not enough, but I am sorry." Sarah Chen looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out of the chamber, and she did not look back. Emperor Malpheus was tried last. The charges against him were extensive. The massacre on Velhari Prime, the violence against subject species during the rebellion, the continued prosecution of a war that resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to permanent exile on an uninhabited world at the edge of known space. His empire was dissolved. The 47 systems that had been under Valeth control were reorganized under the supervision of the Galactic Concord. The conquered species, the Nexians and the Vorani and the Talesi and the Kreth, were granted independence for the first time in centuries. The aftermath of the war reshaped the galaxy in ways that no one had predicted. The Galactic Concord was reformed and strengthened, with new provisions specifically protecting civilian populations and children during conflicts. The provision was called the Lily Chen Accord, and it was signed by every species in known space. It stated, in language that was simple and clear and left no room for interpretation, that the deliberate targeting of children in any conflict was a crime against all sentient life, punishable by the full combined force of the galactic community. Humanity emerged from the war, changed. The species that had been seen as young and emotional and reckless was now viewed with a respect that bordered on reverence. Not because they had won a war, species won wars all the time, but because of why they had fought and how they had fought and what they had done when the fighting was over. They had gone to war for a child. They had fought with everything they had, and when they won, they had chosen justice over revenge, accountability over destruction, mercy over cruelty. They had proven that the same love that made them terrifying in battle also made them compassionate in victory. On Velhari Prime, the colony was rebuilt. The street where Lily Chen had died was turned into a garden. Flowers from Earth and from a dozen other worlds bloomed there year-round, tended by colonists and visiting dignitaries, and sometimes even Valeth civilians who came to lay a flower and stand in silence and try to understand the weight of what their empire had done. At the center of the garden stood a statue. It was not large or grand. It was the size of a real child. A little girl in a yellow dress with white flowers holding a stuffed bear in one hand and reaching up toward the sky with the other. Her face was turned upward, her eyes wide with wonder, as if she was looking at the stars for the very first time. At the base of the statue, a plaque read simply, Lily Chen. She was 6 years old. She liked to draw pictures of stars. She wanted to be an astronaut. She was loved. She is remembered. Sarah Chen visited the garden once a year on the anniversary of her daughter's death. She would sit on the bench beside the statue and talk to Lily about the things that had happened since the last visit, about the new colony buildings and the children playing in the parks and the ships coming and going overhead. She would tell Lily about the Accord named after her and the lives it had saved. She would tell her about the Valith families who had come to understand what their empire had taken from the galaxy and from one small family on a little border world. And sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, when the 2 moons of Velhari Prime hung low in the sky and the garden was empty, and the only sound was the wind moving through the flowers, Sarah would pick up the stuffed bear that sat at the base of the statue. The same bear that had fallen from Lily's hand on the worst day in human history, and she would hold it close and whisper to her daughter, "Look at the stars, baby. You made them safer for everyone." And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds in 1,000 languages, the story was told and retold. The story of a little girl and a yellow dress and a stuffed bear named Captain Fuzzy. The story of an empire that made the worst mistake in galactic history and a species that burned across the stars to answer it. The story that became the foundation of a new age of galactic civilization, an age built not on power or conquest but on a single simple principle that humanity had carried with them since the very first mother held her very first child. You do not touch the children. Not ever. Not anyone's children. Because somewhere out there is a species that will cross the universe to find you. A species that will sacrifice everything, endure anything, and never, ever stop. And they will make sure you remember.